don't like the wind. So I put my hut into the wind. These are my game warden holes here. Okay, I turn on the depth finder, cut the 2 holes. I do not cut the holes any more than 7 to 8 inches. 12-inch hole is max in this state. And if you remember right, there was a little girl that fell through an 8-inch hole in Texas. So that's something I really want to emphasize on if you have children on the ice, is to watch them, because there's no getting them back when they go down. And that's a horrible thought, to lose a small child. And in the springtime, I've seen kids running loose all over the lakes, and I've seen people cutting holes with chainsaws, hatchets, knives, tire irons, and usually I wait till they get just about through, and then I go over and cut a hole for them. Turn on the depth finder, and 90% of the fish I catch are in the plankton level, and that's usually about 15 feet down first thing in the morning, and as the light intensifies throughout the day, the plankton level will drop. And we're talking about zooplankton. It's a small, tiny shrimp, and the fish feed on that just about the whole time the ice is on. That's their main diet, that and a few larvae that come around. So I'll look on the depth finder and see where my fish are running, and yank off 15 feet and start fishing. Now, my bigger fish, and I mean the bigger fish, the fish that I've caught in the 14 and 15 pound range, the rainbows, the hits on them are so light. They're extremely light. You have to be on the ball. But both of these jigs are down at the same depth. And by doing this, I've introduced 2 different colors to see what they're hitting on. And it could be a black jig or a chartreuse jig or an all-glow head or a fire orange head, whatever you choose to put down. And I'll watch it. And if I get a hit on this rod here, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee and I look over and I reach down and I miss my strike, I miss it. And you only have, a lot of times, just that long to set your strike. They're just there for a little while. With these rods that I've invented, I've increased my strike time, but it's still just seconds I've added to the strike time. If you had a stiff rod, they'd go into the wire, then they'd feel the stiff rod, and you'd have less time. So what I've created here, if you looked at it on a graph, would basically be a scale that runs just like that, from 0 to 2.5 ounces. When it gets to 2.5 ounces, the rod is actually teetering. By doing that, I disorientated the fish with the jig further away from the center of the hole, and it's harder for him to return back to the center or to spit the jig at all. So I've just raised the strike time a little bit. 9 times out of 10, I miss my strike on the right pole or the left pole. So when I set the strike and I do miss it, 9 times out of 10, the wind's blowing up there and my line is whoosh. Instead of trying to fish down a 32nd ounce jig back down to the hole, meanwhile, I'm telling a 10-pound fish to wait there just a second till I get the jig back down to you. That's not going to happen. You've got to drop that rod. Reach it up, drop it, right there. Go over to this one here and teeter it a couple times, and that puppy's there. He's there, and your hand is there, and you're ready for him, and that wire will just barely twitch, and you've got him. Now, you remember, this jig is maybe up 6 feet, but you're down 15. So you've still got a jig hanging down there. So meanwhile, you're standing here with a good posture, and you keep your ice rods level, because you're not fishing out now, you're fishing down. When you bring your rod up like this, you're adapting your bad summertime habits to ice fishing, and it's 2 different things. When you bring it up like this, you're putting the pressure back in here on your thin ice rod, and it's going to break with a big fish. So you want to keep it level and keep a good posture and get your fish as far away from the hole as possible. But before you do all that, you want to pick that rod up there and throw that son of a gun back in the snow 15 feet. So you don't have that jig hanging down there, because there's been so many times that I've been angling it and I look over and I see the wire dipping. And I said, well, my God, something's hitting that rod too. So I reach over and I set it, and I'm fighting each arm. And I don't really understand what's going on right at first. So I'll tell you a funny story. I land a 5-pound fish over here. I get down on my knee and I twist down to the fish and I pump him up so I don't make the reel work for me. And I twist down, and I'm always watching the fish because I have a short rod and I can approach the hole now and see what's going on. Because if you have a big fish and you're back with a 6-foot rod, you don't know if you're angling this fish right at the bottom of the ice hole. And he's using that edge to either break or snap the line or dislodge the jig from his mouth. Every fish I have ever caught in all the years I've ice fished, this 32nd ounce jig is half in and half out of the fish's mouth. So now the fish are not biting on the line. They're biting on the jig and the chenille. My success ratio goes sky high. So I land that fish, and meanwhile, this fish has looped my other line, and I'm sitting here with a nice big rainbow on the bank, and I notice there's another jig laying next to the fish. And I look, and I go, well, by God, he looped my line. So meanwhile, I'm sitting there undoing it, and this wire's over there dipping. Well, my partner says, Mark, you got another fish. He runs over and sets the hook, and meanwhile, I'm working for half an hour to get that hook out of my index finger that he just set in there. So I want to emphasize, get this rod out of the water as soon as possible. And take advantage of the 2-rod stamp, because it's going to raise your success ratio sky high. The second problem that I found by using conventional summer gear, and that's why I created my own ice fishing reels by an extreme modification on this Zebco UL3 and UL4 reel, is line twist. And you realize you've got an 8 or 7-inch hole there. Any move this fish makes under the ice is going to take line. If you were in a boat, you can go and work around the bow and around the side of the boat and go with your fish a little bit. Or if you're on the bank, and he wants to go down the bank, you can walk up and down the bank and avoid using your drag as much. But when you're contained to an ice fishing hole, any way there goes is going to take line. On any reel, less a level line bass type reel or a fly reel, you're going to create line twist, because the line is twisted, and even this reel, the line is twisted. One twist to every full revolution you bring this line in. And then when it comes off at the drag, it remains twisted. And then you reel it back in again and you retwist it. So by the time you've landed anything over 4 pounds that's fought you halfway decent, you've twisted up your line where you don't have 6-pound test anymore. So what you have is 2-pound test. And several good runs of 30 yards or better with a fish will do that real quick. So you want to set up a checklist for yourself up there, because you're not going to want to sit there all day long and fish, and then your big one comes along and your line snaps because it's so badly twisted up. That's real important to consider. So what I have done is I figured, well, why don't I just unwind the line the same way it was wound? You can do this in 2 ways. Build a modification like this, or use a fly reel or a level wind bass reel, where the line is wound on like that and unwound like that. The only problem with those 2 type of reels is when you bring in 10 feet of line, say you come up from 20 feet and you want to fish 10 feet, you've got wet line that's exposed to the wind. And then you go to set your strike and you've got line that's froze to itself, and you have no release for your drag. And that sound that you want to hear is that, and I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a, and everybody's heard that sound. That's what turns on most fishermen. Turns me on. The only time I hear that with these reels is setting the strike, period. That's the only time I use it. My drag is a fail-safe. After I set the strike, I kick off the anti-reverse lever and lay my index finger on the wheel that I've built here. And this is where my success ratio comes in. This is why I'm landing big fish. So now it's like putting a tire on a horse in a field. That's because you're left-handed. You southpaws. He always fishes on my left side, too. So when the fish makes a run, if you can see what I'm doing here, is I'm laying my finger on the wheel and I'm controlling the fish. I'm my own drag now. So I let them get started. And I break their back because I slowly start applying finger pressure on the wheel. And when I feel the fish get tireder, I put a little more pressure on him. He gets a little more tired, a little more pressure. And now I'm really into the fish catching business because it's fun because you're feeling the action right there. You're not letting the drag work for you. And 30 degrees below zero, and I fish that quite regularly, your drag is worthless. You don't know where it's at. Sometimes you have to loosen the drag a little for the fish to run right, and then you sit there and you're winding and you're winding and you're winding and you hear that noise and the fish isn't coming or going. While you're doing that, the line's just twisting something terrible, even worse than if he had not ran the drag at all. Now, I use my own jig and my own creation. I started out at Ontario Reservoir fishing salmon eggs with my bad summertime habits. And by the way, I don't fish in the summertime anymore. I wait till the water gets hard, and I don't fish it unless I can walk on it. And this jig is a 32nd ounce crappie type jig, and you can see the way it sits. It sits in a lateral basis. That's the way I like to see it presented. I present it with 2 corn grubs on it. 2 corn grubs, and usually you can pick up corn grubs at Browner's Baits or several other tackle stores. If not, I have a toll-free number to call that you can get them sent, 500 of them to your door at $5.50 for 500, and they're there in less than 6 days. And they keep for about 3 weeks, providing you change the meal, the bedding in them, because they urinate and their ammonic acids will kill them all off. So you want to change it with cornmeal. So I put 2 of them on the hook laterally, and to fish this time of year are like ice cream cones to us. It's a real special treat for them. And if the scent's there, is what I'm adding is action, attraction, and scent. The action is I jig the lure up and to 1 full revolution on the line. I've never caught a big fish jigging. Fish don't feel like chasing that jig around down there. And I'm talking double-digit fish. Smaller ones you can pop, jigging pretty easy, but the big ones, they don't do it. All my strikes are when the jig is unwinding from me twisting it up. So I'll come along and wind up 1 rod, twist that jig up and pop it, snatch it, snatch it, snatch it, and then set it down real slow, come over to this one and watch that rod while I jig this one. And I wind it up for about 4 minutes. Set it down and let them unwind. And constantly, you keep these wire beads within your peripheral vision so you can catch both of them. When one starts to dip, we jump right back into what I talked about before, having them both at the same level and go for it as fast as you can. So a lot of people say, wait until he takes it. No, wait a minute, wait till he takes it. Man, he's got that jig. The minute you see that wire move, that's in his mouth. If you snooze, you lose. And that's a real good rule of thumb. So it has to be right away. So reflexes. Now I've had friends that have real stiff boat type rods with a nice 20 thousandths gauge piano wire on it. And they're down. Oop, excuse me for a second, I kicked off my wireless. We're down here like this all day. I mean, That's a muscle tension. I just can't be like that because a lot of the time, this is my position. I'm sound asleep out there. I love it. The box is black. It draws heat in. I think it's one of the best inventions that I've ever come up with. It's because I'm comfortable. And it just reverts back to what Dick said. If you're not comfortable, you're not catching fish. You're out there walking around trying to warm up your feet. You're taking your attention off of your rods, so you run into some real major problems. You're not fishing, you're getting warm. So that's what you want to do. The rod savers were designed by Dickey Tackle Company in Land O'Lakes, Michigan. And a lot of the stores like Uncle Milty's and Al's Sporting Goods carries these. And they're real light. This whole system here weighs 4.5 ounces. Now imagine landing a 22-pound lake trout with 4.5 ounces in your hand. I may not be catching the biggest fish in this state, but I'm just about catching the biggest fish with the lightest amount of weight in my hands, which is real exciting to me. I enjoy it because I'm feeling what's going on. I can take a 1-pound brookie down there and still get turned on. When the rod starts to get pulled down the hole, that springs. Now the rod is like that. When I started at Ontario Reservoir, and that's where I created the system, 6 rods are in the bottom of that lake right now. And 6 reels, and several new cuss words have been invented because of that reason. One time, I said, well, let's eat a sandwich. By the way, eating sandwiches, drinking a cup of coffee enhances strikes for some reason. Go to the bathroom. Every time. They can sense it. They totally sense it. I picked up a rod, and I says, well, this ain't going to happen to me this time. I had a friend here in the hut. I stretched it and pulled line off and kept it at the same depth and set it down right about like this. And then I walked right over here to do something. In about 2 seconds flat, that rod shot across the ice, stood up like a flag, and went down. While my friend sat there and watched it, scratching his head. He said, what the hell are you doing? So, and by the way, I've seen people with 6-foot casting rods with Mitchell 300s lose them just as quick, if not quicker. But it's more funny because the whole rod goes way up like that, and then it goes down. So, believe you me, it happens. I'm shedding here. My dog has got some beautiful hair on him, but it seems to want to draw to me. Now, I'm primarily a rainbow trout fisherman. I go up to Granby a few times each year and try for lake trout. And there's nothing better than the Big Mac attack, because they're a fantastic fish to fish for. And that's where the depth finders really come in for my uses, because you've got 100 feet of water to choose where you're going to fish. For lake trout, the fish primarily will suspend themselves just underneath the school of kokanee that they're pursuing. And the kokanee will feed on plankton. That's their primary diet. So they're at the 15 to 20 to 30 foot levels. And the lake trout are usually between 70 and 50 to 40 feet when they're up feeding and active. And then they'll just peer right up into that school of kokanee and nail them. And sometimes they'll sting 3 or 4 kokanee. And they may not eat them, but they'll sting them. And these kokanee will spiral down to the bottom. So you'll have kokanee on the bottom. You'll have lake trout on the bottom, picking up what has come down, or the bits and pieces that have come down, and you'll have them up in the plankton level as well. So is what you want to watch for in the depth finder is that big black line to start printing out. Now I use an airplane jig and a different rod setup for lake trout. I use a more beefier rod 9 times out of 10. And I use an airplane jig, and when I see them come across at 50 feet, I just drop that jig, whether it be open the bail on a reel or push the button on a flipping attachment on a level line reel, whatever, I drop it to them. And that airplane jig was designed to cut a spiral, just like a sucker. and you tip that airplane jig with a strip of sucker meat to add scent and help loft the jig, keep the nose up on the jig. And it'll spiral down, and I've had them Mackinac come right up and catch that thing, and you can watch the whole thing on your depth finder. You can sit there, watch the jig go down, watch the lake trout come up and take it, and you know darn good and well you're in 100 feet of water, and when that line curls up like a slinky, you let up on your button or you flip your bail shut and you walk backwards and set that strike, and usually that Mac is going to pull you right back to the hole again. There's some real fighting fish. For rainbows, I use only 6-pound trilene green or trilene clear, XL. I don't use 2-pound test, I don't use 4-pound, I don't use 8. And I've caught just as many fish as people with 2-pound test right next to me. They say it enhances their strikes using 2-pound test. Let them use it. I'm the one pulling the 10-pounders out. They're the ones that are breaking it and talking about it. They're the ones that come home with the story. I come home with the fish. There's a big difference. 6-pound test, I've tried Strand. Now I work for Berkeley, so I'm a little partial, but I wouldn't be working for Berkeley if I didn't believe in what I'm using. I tried 6-pound Strand. The stuff when I let it out in the morning is like a slinky. I couldn't tell if I had a hit first thing in the morning for the life of me, because it's just like a little coil spring there. XL trilene dissipates spool memory twice as fast as any other line on the market right now in the 6-pound class. And that's why I use it. This year I'm starting to use trilene green more than I was using the trilene clear. And it disappears better. But nobody, and don't let anybody fool you, nobody has made an invisible line in the water. Nobody has. That's technology that has not come out yet. So you want to consider that. Another thing you want to consider is using fluorescent lures, whether it be mine or anybody else's. Fluorescent lures will maintain their color deeper in water than non-fluorescent lures. There's one color, which is right here, that is called chartreuse. Chartreuse fluorescent maintains its color to the deepest depths over any other color on the color spectrum. Now if you have, say for example, a red lure that's non-fluorescent, depending on the watercolor and how much light penetration you have, red will turn to rust, turn to brown, and turn to black shortly after 30 feet. So you don't have a red lure down there. And it will happen with even a good fire orange fluorescent, but it happens at a deeper depth. So fluorescence is something to consider. You are in a limited light situation anyway because of the ice on the lake and your early morning conditions. And if you remember, trout don't have eyelids, so they like the shadows in the darker depths. Now the reason I'm getting big fish at 15 feet is because trout, as they get bigger, become loners. And the only time they start schooling again, and they're not really schooling when they're in the plankton level, they are just massively bloating out on plankton. And they're there because they enjoy it. But when little fish come in the plankton level, the big fish definitely run them out, and they run them out in a hurry. So big fish are dominant in the plankton level. Now you can go out to 11 Mile, walk out there anywhere, cut a hole, let your eyes adjust and look down in the hole, and give it 3 minutes till your eyes actually adjust to the darkness that you're looking into, and you'll start to see little tiny things flicking and jerking around. The plankton at 11 Mile Reservoir in the summertime usually is blown into the wind-blown side of the lake, into the beach side. And it concentrates down on any of the beach ends of any big reservoir. But once the reservoir freezes, then the zooplankton has a chance to start working its way back out. And if you picture a cloud in the sky, and you look on a cloudy day where you got the big cumulus clouds up there, that's what plankton is like in a reservoir. And you may have bigger schools of plankton here than over here. So 200 yards down the lake, there may be a huge school of plankton, and the fish are just basking in it, just like whales feed on plankton. So sometimes it pays to fish one place an hour, and then go cut a couple more holes somewhere else if you're not having any action. And then when you get into them, you'll get into them. And sometimes, like I made the mistake of doing years back, you get carried away, and you just, oh my God, there's a 7-pound rainbow there next to me. I want another one. And you go back down and it happens again, and it happens again. There's been times years ago where I've walked off the lake with 8 fish. At Georgetown last year, they put a bunch of brooders in there. They were starving fish, and they were put in there to enjoy. I enjoyed 8 of them, who amounted to 78 pounds. 8 fish. When we looked at the fish, they had nothing in their stomachs, and that's just about how that whole lake is at Georgetown. There's really not much feed in that lake. They were put in there to be caught out, and that's what I did. I caught 8 fish. It was the first of the year. Went home, filleted them, packaged them out, and enjoyed them the rest of the winter, and released most of the fish I caught the rest of the winter. The 11-mile fish are probably the most tasty fish and rainbows in the state of Colorado. So in correlation to what Dick said, with the slot limit being 2 big fish over 16 inches, I might take 1 fish home and enjoy it. Some days I may put them all back. That's something you might want to consider, is putting some of them back. That's they grow so fast in that lake. The average. I got a crawdad on this one, and I got a chartreuse jig here with a glow head and
which one you getting the strikes on?
well, they've been. I put some of this. What is that stuff? Some of this Berkeley Alive slime on the crawdad and 2 corn grubs, and they're grabbing it and pulling it down and just holding it real light. That's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But it's just a 1-inch
Yeah,
long crawdad.
little dad. I think I got it on the tape. I'm not sure.
It's
We'll
not a
get
big
it.
one.
But you've got both wire tips in here. I think you got about the prettiest picture you can get. You go over and take a look at it, but don't touch the camera.
I'll take your word for it. I feel good about this. Now, that was
Well,
just.
I've got to get over and man my poles because I know I had a bite on one and it looked like it probably messed my jig up. So I got to go set my jig up.
Boy, this springtime ice fishing
Oh
is
man, isn't this
incredible.
beautiful? This is the second time I've been able to take my coveralls off up here.
You know, something that is kind of comical. This morning when we set the strike on that one fish, it come out of the water 2 feet,
Yeah.
and I had 15 feet of line out. And you set a strike and thought you missed him and let your rod down. And I looked over and the fish shot up
Out of the hole over
out
there
of the
by
hole
my
over there. And that's
on
the
other-
weirdest phenomenon I ever seen in my life.
I didn't even know I had him on for quite a while until I finally got enough line in. He had it wrapped around half the world down there. I
Did
think.
he?
Yeah.
And that's funny as hell.
That was just a little bitty sucker, 2 week through impact.
That's funny. I think that fishing's going to pick up a little bit here.
Yeah, I feel good about today. I've got to get over here and take care of this critter, so
Okay.
see you in a bit.
Okie doke. On this rod here, he went to the crawdad first. Look, you know, it's a big rainbow. Just come right down, look right down on it. Stand up, come down on it, Bill. Good. That's up.
Turn him sideways a little. Lame black, you got too much glare. tell you what, this one's really giving some runs, I'll tell you. There he goes, back down he goes.
Choice, face, background, and clothes, you know? Because the face never comes out. So, it's like,
There comes my other line.
Makes you think when